They say if you can see it, you can be it. I could never see it. And I do reflect a lot about if I had been my authentic self, would I have accelerated quicker?
Kat Parsons. This is STEMazing.
My first inkling that I was interested in a career in the environment was, as quite a young child, I was outside constantly. I was always in a muddy puddle, up a tree, making a mud pie. The thought of having a job when I was older, when I would be sat behind a desk all day, was just not something that I wanted. I wanted to be outside, enjoying the environment. As I sort of got older and went through my primary school and my secondary school career, it came to the decision of like, okay, what am I going to do at university? And actually, the planet and sustainability had become something that was very important to me. The idea was I'd go to university, do quite a generic course in environmental sciences, and then work out which bit I really wanted to focus on. And it turned out mud pies turned into a career, and my job was in contaminated land for 16 years, where I put mud in a jar and water in a bottle, all at the same time saving the planet and holding large corporations accountable for the damage they'd done to some of the land. It was my job to remediate it, clear it up, and for it to be used for future uses. I would say, I think, in terms of my career and people's opinion on it, my family were always hyper supportive. I think they could see that I wasn't designed for being inside, although that is actually my job majority of the time now. I think people warned me it'd probably be a bit tough. You're on construction sites, you're isolated a lot, you're out in a van, 5 days a week. That's quite difficult in terms of your personal life, managing relationships and friendships and things. I think I was slightly warned that maybe it might be quite tough, but I think you could see I was quite a tough and resilient child anyway, so I make friends and connections very quickly, so I wasn't too concerned. And to be honest, I think anyone could have said anything and I would have continued anyway, so nothing was going to stop me. When I was younger, my sister was quite ill. She had cancer when she was 5 and I was 7, so I think I learnt quite early on that I needed to sort of get on with it. So that was just normal. It was a sort of normal not to have my parents around too much. So I just sort of cracked on, really. And I think that sort of hyper independent, that's where that comes from. So that sort of getting stuff done and setting your mind to something without potentially having as much support as you maybe would do in your childhood, that just was normal for me. So if anything, these things happen for a reason. I think that it really did make me resilient and driven to get where I wanted to go, basically. So a bad situation, but a positive spin. I mean, when I first joined the workforce, it was difficult. I was one of sort of a handful of women, but I didn't really notice it too much. I think because of that I always think I've got a bit of a shape-shifting character about me. I can fit into any environment that I fall into. I can talk to a CEO and be absolutely fine. I can go and speak to some engineers and equally have a full conversation and get what's needed. So I wasn't particularly concerned. I think the red flags were early in my career going into our stores. So I used to work for an environmental consultancy. We'd go out and use drill rigs and, you'd be drilling next to oil pipelines and all sorts of things. So really high risk stuff. But going into like the welfare facilities and there'd be like a stack of pornography next to the toilet was just normal. And the page 3 pin-ups on the wall were normal. It was quite hard, I felt, in terms of you had to really prove yourself and you could never just work at 100%. You had to work at like 200%. You couldn't be the weak link and you couldn't show any sign of struggle or anything. So, I talk a lot about menstrual cycles and period pains. Like I get crippling period pains. Luckily, not every month. They just like to surprise me every now and again. But if I was on a construction site and that happened, you'd just have to carry on and I'd be absolutely doubled over with heat packs and painkillers and, curled up in a corner sometimes. But I would not show any weakness. I'd carry on and I'd get the job done because I felt it would be detrimental to, people respecting me. But what I actually realised was, that was quite a number of years of sort of struggling, actually, to say something that actually gave men the opportunity to say, oh, actually, my wife really struggles as well. So by me taking the first step to be vulnerable, they were talking about all sorts of things, menopause, all these sorts of topics. Actually, I was then sort of the inside knowledge. I was the safe space to ask all these questions because I was the one who had started the conversations. But it is difficult. And I'm a lesbian. I'm married to a wonderful woman called Fee. And that was always difficult as well because you'd come onto site and they'd be like, oh, what's your fella do? And then I'd have to sort of trip around pronouns and they are a really difficult because that's very personal. I never knew how that would be taken if people would homophobic comments. I've had all that sort of stuff in the past. So it is very difficult. You're asking someone to be very open about who they are. You wouldn't ask a heterosexual couple that, but it was very difficult. I felt it was exhausting, to be honest, trying to sort of hide that. So again, I think that bit of sort of my resilience in childhood kicked in. And I thought, you know what, I don't care. So you're having all of it. If you want to ask a question, that's the answer. And actually I found that's probably more of a power than trying to trip over and hide from it. There was never any tips. This was probably 2006 at this point. There weren't a lot of us around us, female engineers. There was a handful. It was almost like sort of this unwritten thing that if you could turn up the sort of flirt a little bit, so you come onto site, act almost like the sort of meek female that I can't carry this around site. It's so heavy, please would you help me? It sort of helped a bit, but that's, again, absolutely not me. I'm a lesbian. I don't want to be flirting with these guys on site to get the job done. But you were very treated, there'd be guys that would be like, oh, we can't swear because there's a woman on site. Well, I would have said 10 times worse because I was one of the guys and I was sort of fitting in, and I'd use that language as the sort of that chameleon effect. I'd turn onto site, put my hard hats and rigger boots on, and I'd be a different person to get what I needed to get the job done. And that was always very hard to turn off on a Friday. I used to go home and my other half would be like, please tone your language down because it's not required. But that's who I had to be during the week to get my job done, to be respected and to progress in my career. Very difficult. There was no networks when I was in the construction industry. It was only when I went out of the industry. I'd signed after 16 years. I wasn't progressing as fast as I wanted to. I'm very ambitious, very skilled in certain areas, and I didn't think that was being utilised. So I moved out of the construction industry and moved into facilities management. And someone said to me when I first joined, oh, you should really join one of the ERGs. And I sort of smiled and nodded and then had to Google what an ERG was, which is an employee resource group. I'd never heard of an employee resource group where I could then join the LGBTQIA group to talk to other queer people from the community. The women's network. There was all these networks and I was like, this is absolutely bizarre in a good way, but I hadn't been used to that in my entire career. I mean, the only tips and tricks that I would share with my other female engineers was don't drink too much water during the day because then you have to use the toilets and the toilets are horrendous. So, I'm surprised I haven't got severe bladder issues, to be honest, along with other female engineers. It was almost like keep snacks in the car, keep paracetamol in the car, make sure you've got tampons and sanitary products and stuff. You'd almost have like a kit bag that we all sort of knew what we needed to just sort of crack on. Nothing at all from employers about how to sort of be a minority in a male-dominated industry. And I did have some experiences where, I was treated pretty badly on some sites and I fed that back. And there were conversations that were had at higher levels to say, unacceptable. We've had a word, it won't happen again. Or you just get diverted to a different site. So no, it was really tough. And moving across into facilities management, I remember going on a call with a supplier who he'd just talk over me constantly. Everything I said was sort of disagreed and smirked at. He rolled his eyes on calls. I've per complaining because I was like, I'm not employed to do this. I'm sort of a manager in this organisation. This is not how I'm treated. And the company were phenomenal. And it went through a whole process. They weren't happy with how the follow-up calls went, and they were no longer a supplier for the organisation. So I have had some really good experiences. I've equally had some pretty poor experiences. I'm very ambitious. I've always been very ambitious. My kids never win a board game. And that goes across into my career. I joined as a graduate environmental consultant. Within 12 months, I was sort of next level up. I had promotion. That was great. But then everything did feel quite difficult, and there was male colleagues that seemed to be accelerating that sort of 12 months before I was. And there seemed to be this unwritten thing as well, that when a guy announced that he was starting a family, his partner's wife was pregnant, there seemed to be this sort of unwritten rule that he would then be allowed to be in the office, which was, again, a sort of a promotion. You weren't out and about in the van all the time. But then when I announced that my partner was carrying our first child, like nothing happened. I was still sent up to Scotland for 3 weeks because I was the best person for the job. It wasn't ever even. It was sort of like a bit of a pat on the back lads club of, well done. You're a family man now. You must be in the office to be around for your partner. But I didn't have the same opportunity because obviously I wasn't the one that was carrying. And then I did find that as I was sort of being more vocal about wanting to progress and demonstrating the skills that I had and therefore where I could move in the organisation, I did feel like there was a lot of very minor points that were pushed back at me to say, well, actually could really improve on your report writing. At this point, I hadn't written reports for years. That was not something that I'd need to do. in the role that I was aiming for. So I did find there was a lot of being sort of pushed back into my box, basically, to say, not yet, you've not proved yourself. And it was only that when a new technical director came in, a brilliant woman called Louise, and she saw instantly that I could get stuff done, anything that was short notice, any pain in the behind client. I absolutely love a logistical nightmare. I don't know what it is. It's something I've already done. I'm a bit of a fixer, and she could see that. And within 6-8 months of her joining, I'd got the promotion I've been pushing for 2 years, because she championed me and said, Kat's the right person for this role. And from then I had 2 more promotions before I decided that actually time for a change and a complete career change. I wanted to do something different because I didn't feel I could progress anymore in the field I was in. I found it really difficult when I moved across from oil and gas construction industry into facilities management, mostly because I had no idea what facilities management was when I applied for the job. And I moved across as a health and safety manager, which is not something I'd ever had as sort of my primary job function. But again, having worked on high-risk sites with behaviour-based safety systems, it was easy. It was a lot of slip, trips and falls and did a spray in the eye, something like that. It wasn't difficult. So from a competency point of view, I absolutely smashed all the boxes. Although when the job description came through, there's probably about 50% I couldn't probably do. So I was trying to sort of reassure myself that once I got in, fake it till you make it, maybe a little bit, that I could prove myself. So it was a direct move. There was no promotion, and that did worry me that I wasn't going up a step. But within 12 months of moving into that organisation, they were like, you're in the wrong position. And I was moved into a more senior position. But the thing I found most difficult to adjust to, and this sounds really weird, I've always worked in male-dominated environments that are usually white middle-aged men called John, Luke or Simon, I found was mostly what they were called. When I moved across, I've never worked in such a diverse organisation of cultures, ethnicities, races. There was 57% female workforce. I was like a fish out of water. That was a real big adjustment for me, but it was actually just such a breath of fresh air that I could be the same person inside and outside of work, and that my value was seen very easily without me having to work at 200%. I did that role for 2 years in a health and safety role. They decided to create a head of diversity and inclusion, and I initially turned it down because I didn't think I was competent to do the job. And maybe that's a bit of imposter syndrome, maybe that's a lack of confidence in myself, but I'd done a lot of work around the menopause and opening up and those sorts of vulnerable conversations and taboo topics. And I think they then saw that there was potential there to utilise that further in this role. So it did take a bit of persuasion on their part to get me in. And I did it for 2 years, and I took the company to highly commended at the European Diversity Awards for Company of the Year because of the culture change piece that I'd led. So I'm in a completely different world to what I used to be in. But I think those links are there in terms of that ESG, the environmental sustainability piece. I'm creating a sustainable workforce for the future that are delivering now for Centrica a greener, fairer future. That ticks all my boxes. But equally, I'm creating that workplace where people can thrive and they can be who they are. And they don't have to be what I had to be and shapeshift and swear their heads off all day to be able to be respected in their workplace. I think that the power of storytelling is absolutely critical. And by being the one that is the empathetic leader who says when they're struggling or their experiences they've got at home. I talk about my son a lot, who's neurodivergent, and it is tough to parent 2 very different children. I talk about my wife being menopausal a lot, who's probably fed up about hearing her name mentioned on various calls. But by me opening up and being really vulnerable about the situation that I find myself in and what I really struggle with and how to support others, that just pushes that door open just a little crack, which then it flies open, and I get queues of people talking to me about the point that their marriage is on the point of divorce because they didn't understand their wife's menopausal symptoms, or their parents were terminally ill and they didn't feel they could talk about it at work. I had a really nice experience at my last organisation where there was a man who worked in the office called David, and he used to come in every day in a pinstripe suit. And I was talking about my friends in the trans community and my experience being in an LGBTQIA plus community as well. And by having those conversations, within a couple of weeks, he messaged me and said, actually, I'm transgender, but I come in as David during the day because I'm scared, basically. But at home, I'm D. So he was asking me how he could potentially come into work as D. I had so many of his managers and colleagues contact me to say, we want to make sure that D feels as welcome as possible. What do we have to do? Dee is in her 60s, and it's the first time that she has come into an organisation as her authentic self. And that, for me, was like absolutely just amazing that she felt that she could do that and was totally respected, and it was totally normal. It was brilliant. If I can create that environment where people like Dee feel that they can be who they actually are and not hide it, then, you know, that's my job done. That keeps me happy for week after week. For me, being a role model is someone that I would have wanted when I was younger and earlier in my career. They say if you can see it, you can be it. I could never see it, which is, I think, why I struggled so much sort of quite early in my career to be someone that I maybe wasn't and not be authentic to who I was. And I do reflect a lot about if I had been my authentic self early in my career, would I have accelerated quicker than trying to, that exhausting, having to sort of second guess and hide part of who I was. Being a role model, again, is around, it's huge in terms of that allyship piece. It's what it means to other people. It's leading by example. It is being, I am very open and honest, to anyone that I speak to. And I do like to pick those topics that are harder for people to talk about and make it really normal. It's me role modelling to my own family as well and my kids. And I have a soon-to-be 10-year-old daughter who joined me on stage at a Female in Field event for British Gas during half term. And she absolutely marched on stage. She regurgitated everything that I talk about. When I talk about my day at work, when we finished having dinner, everyone talks about their day. How was your day? How was your day? And I will say about how things have been quite tough, or I've had this conversation, or, this experience. And it all absolutely dripped into her. She'd absorbed it all, and she basically did my speech for me. I was redundant. I could have just sat back. So that next generation, if we can get them to have these conversations as well, that they understand, and they understand Fee being menopausal, and they always heat up the Wheatie bag for me when I'm struggling with my period pains. That's normal. So if I can get that normal in my household, when they grow up and they have their own families, that's absolutely normal as well. And these conversations aren't hidden or shied away from or embarrassing. They're just who we are and what we bring to the table. The legacy I would like to leave in my field of diversity and inclusion is that it is absolutely possible to create culture change without focusing on targets and ticking boxes and beating people over the head because they've not hired the right people. It's around making sure that every colleague feels like they count, that they're listened to, they're visible, they're respected. And if I can continue on that thread to show that my style of working and being absolutely approachable with an open diary, and I will listen and I will absorb and I will make change happen and get the right people in the room and network together to create that change, then that is absolutely what I'd like to leave behind and inspire others to do.
For more information about the guest featured in this episode, head to stamazing.co.uk/podcast. And to join the inspiration and inclusion revolution, just visit stamazing.co.uk. With thanks to Alexandra Knight and our production team at What Goes On Media. This is Stamazing.